Hello there, this is Ofori. Welcome to your favorite human interest chat show, The African Dream. Today's edition is coming to you from Accra in Ghana, and we're here with Jemila Abdulai. Today's edition is sponsored by Circumspect. Jemila, welcome to The African Dream.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on here.
Great to be here.
What do you do specifically?
So I'm a digital media strategist.
Right.
Also a trainer and coach for social media marketing.
Right.
And I'm the founder and editor of Circumspect.com.
Sponsoring today's show.
Yes, which is sponsoring today's show.
Interesting. So what is Circumspect all about?
So Circumspect is a digital media company. It started off as a blog when I was actually a student in the United States.
What year is this?
In 2007.
Okay.
And over the past almost 12 years, we've been creating digital content primarily about Africa and Africans. So we cover a wide range of topics, including entrepreneurship, career, information, policy, lifestyle. Now we've included topics like fitness and health.
Nice.
And so on. And we also, on the services side, we offer trainings in digital skills. We also offer strategic communication services to companies, SMEs, multilaterals, and so on. And then we organize events both online and offline.
How have you been able to harness the power of the internet to the benefit of you as a person, Jemila Abdulai, and the upliftment of Circumspect as a firm?
I started using the internet at a very early stage for my generation. I started using computers at 4 years old.
Okay.
And I got onto the internet, I believe, when I was still in primary school. Because my father is a computer scientist, so I grew up around books and computers.
Right.
And when I was in college, I was studying abroad in France, and I was seeing all these parallels between lifestyle in France and lifestyle in Ghana, and I wanted to capture that and capture my travels. And so that's how come Circumspect came about. So being on the internet for over a decade,
right.
I would say maybe closer to 2 decades at this point, it has been very, very uplifting, and it has added a lot of value to my life because it has brought about a lot of awareness about different things, not just on the personal sphere, but also linked to Africa, Ghana, and the global community. As an economist, it's a good way for me to be able to understand what's happening in the geopolitical space as well. And I think now what our mission really is to provide quality information, to spur real, meaningful interactions, and to inspire creative action. And so everything we do as Circumspect and myself
right.
Really is geared towards that. And so events-wise, for example, we started the Sisterhood Matters event series in 2016,
okay.
and that was in commemoration of International Women's Month. And now it's grown. We were 17 people then, and our most recent event in April focused on women's health and well-being, and it's grown to over 100 women in attendance for the offline event. And then for the online segment of that event, we have digital conversations. So we talked about everything from careers to pregnancy and motherhood to dealing with reproductive health issues,
right.
and so on. And so it's great to be able to not only see the impact Circumspect has been having over the past decade by way of the information and resources we provide to Africans in the diaspora and people who care about Africa, but also to seeing people make real meaningful connections as part of our networking events offline. So it's been good.
You seem and sound like you have your hands full.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Sisterhood Matters, which it's really specific for me to stress on the fact that you're a woman and you're looking to champion causes to do with women. Being a woman and working in Ghana or working in Africa in general, what are some of the problems you face?
I feel like there are challenges being a woman anywhere, right? But it's just a question of what dynamic is prevalent in that space, and then that would determine the kind of challenges you deal with. But I think when I finished my graduate studies at Johns Hopkins in Washington, D.C., and I moved to first Tunisia, then Ivory Coast, to work with a major development organization, one of the things that I quickly realized was a lot of the time women, especially young women, are not taken seriously because there's a bit of ageism in the African context. Of course, there's a lot of respect given to the elderly, and sometimes that translates into young people don't know what they're about. And so you, as a woman, you find that you might have to reiterate things. You might have to it's almost like you have to prove yourself, even if you know that you're capable, you have the track record, there's still some element of having to prove yourself. Also, you kind of have to be very aware of your situation and the context within which you're working. So a lot of the time I have to, it's almost like you have to read minds. I have to kind of look out for cues if I'm in public transport, for example, because it's very easy for a man to get upset because they feel like the way you spoke to them is not the way a woman or a young woman should be talking to a man. And of course, a lot of that has to do with cultural context and people's different expectations. But that said, I will say that for the most part, it's been a joy working as a woman on the continent. I find that people are, even though they might not necessarily take you seriously initially, but they tend to be helpful. At the very minimum, they want to offer some level of help. And for me, I've had a great time working not just with women, but also working with men and being able to bring a different perspective. Because I think at the end of the day, that's really what it is. Like we're different kinds of people from across the world, different backgrounds, whether male or female. And at the end of the day, we can all be looking at a project, but we might have very different entryways into how we try to move that project forward. So I really like that dynamic and the diversity of thought around that.
Right now there's this movement called the Me Too movement, which is giving a lot of voice to women, and we're here in Ghana, Accra specifically. Do you think women are starting to find their voices? If yes, why? And if no, how can they find that voice?
So I think this question of women's voice is one that has been very personal for me as someone who is an outspoken woman and who creates content. Like you mentioned, a lot of the content is geared towards African women. And one of the things that I always tried to figure out was, why was it that even when an article is published and it's clearly talking about a woman or highlighting a woman's business, it's usually the men who are responding and commenting. And that's kind of what led us along the pathway to Sisterhood Matters. What I found is that women do have voice. The only difference is how they use it. So not to be stereotypical, but if you are in a conference and it's time for Q&A, I would say 7 out of 10 times the first person to stand up, ask a question or make a comment is going to be a man, right? And so men seem to actively use their voice in that way, but it doesn't mean that the women don't have thoughts or don't have opinions. So what we do with Sisterhood Matters, for example, is we create a space where the women feel like, number one, they're safe to say what they want to say, because the reality is, in a lot of the context and depending on the topics you're addressing, women can get backlash for the things they say. And we see this whether it's a woman who's talking about politics or talking about health and relationships, there's some level of that there. So the first thing is they need to feel safe. Secondly, they need to feel heard, because in instances, if you look at many boardroom situations, for example, there are women there, but the reason why they probably don't speak is because when they speak, nobody's listening to them. So there needs to be a dynamic of being heard. And then finally, to know that what they say can have impact. And so with Sisterhood Matters, we have fine-tuned that program and our events to address those three levels, to create the space where women feel safe enough to share with each other, to create a situation where they're heard because there are other people who are actively listening to them, and it's not them trying to be heard above all the other voices.
Right.
And then finally, they get to see immediately the kind of impact a story or their story can have on another woman, or in some cases, we actually have some men at the events as well, to actually see how it transforms those guys and their thinking as well.
Right.
So I think that's what we do in that respect.
I like what you said about the fact that you create an environment which is safe, enabling for the woman to be herself. You also let them realize that now that you're safe, you can be yourself. Let us hear your voice.
Exactly.
Your voice counts. And, if you know that you're safe and you have a voice, use it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking to see more of, women being able to use their voice more and more often. And I think that I agree with you when you talk about the cultural aspect, where we dwell in a society where women are sort of like not given the needed attention and, most importantly, the respect they deserve, irrespective of who they are and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Why
and
is
I think actually, if I may, but I think what we are also seeing is, so even though a lot of women might not be comfortable sharing their opinions on a public platform like circumspect.com, for example, we're beginning to see a lot of them do so in groups. So Facebook groups are becoming very popular among African women, not just in Ghana. I know there's such groups in Senegal, for example, Nigeria. And these are groups of women primarily, where women talk about things that matter to them. And a lot of the stories on those groups are very personal down to how she's feeling, how a relationship is going, how she's dealing with situations at work, her aspirations, and so on. So again, I'm beginning to think that a lot of it is finding and crafting the right spaces, whether online or offline, and then giving that opportunity, and using the voice also extends to creativity, music, art. A lot of women are using social media to do business, and that's a way of also owning your voice and agency.
When we look across the continent, women are starting to climb to the fore slowly but surely. Rwanda, for instance, has a bunch of women in parliament. Ethiopia has a woman prime minister. Ghana, for instance, there are a few women in the parliament right now. The ambassador of Ghana to Ethiopia is a woman. And women are starting to rise to the fore. Why is it so important for Africa that women find their voices and use them?
I mean, I feel like the African woman has always been in the forefront. The only thing is, most times you see her as being in the background, right? So I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's just becoming more visible because we have digital platforms, we have social media, we're able to see it now, right? But it's important because 50% of the continent's population is female, right? And just for that reason, it's important, if we're looking for Africa's development, holistic development, it's important that we understand the needs of both women and men, girls and boys, and to be able to understand how the different policies, the different programs, the different opportunities and challenges are impacting on each of these groups. And once we're able to understand that, then we have the tools we need to craft policies, to craft programs, to build businesses that really cater to the needs of people.
Right. Now, let's go back to social media. You have been verified on social media. Twitter verified you not so long ago. I know it feels awesome, but what was the magic? Tell us, what are some of the things that you felt like you were doing that made Twitter feel like you're worthy of gaining verification?
So I'm trying to think. I think I was verified about 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, and I don't remember the circumstance, but I think I was doing some work related to Ghana's elections, I think. And so with Twitter verification, I don't know if it's still the process today, but back then the process was simply that you apply, actually. You apply to be verified. And so if they consider you to be a public figure of some sort, or consider that the kind of information that you're providing goes to a multitude of people, and so you need to be able to say that I actually said this versus I didn't, then I'm assuming those are some of the criteria they use for figuring out who to verify or not. But it is, like you said, it's great to be verified. But I think for me, I'm very aware of the responsibility that comes with that verification. So what I try to do a lot of is when there are incidents, like social incidents, where maybe there's some injustice somewhere, either in the business space or in the human rights space, for example, and there's a group of people that is trying to make their voice heard, but they're not able to get it to the masses as they want to. That's what I really use my verification for, because I'm verified, it means that other accounts that are verified, global news platforms, are more likely to pay attention, right? And so I try to use it in that respect. I'm very aware of the responsibility that comes with it, and I think that's really what I have to say about that.
Right. Pay attention to the responsibility and try not to,
take advantage of it. Yes.
That's interesting. Tell us, when you look across Africa today, there's a lot of talk about the fact that the African Union is not using the power of its voice enough. There are a lot of things that have gone on across the continent that the AU has been very silent about. Some people are of the opinion that the AU is losing its voice or is trying not to play the devil's advocate, all based down to the African mentality. Do you feel like the AU should be more proactive and, even more importantly, vocal?
So I don't really know if I can answer that question, because I don't know enough about where their strategy is leading them to. I know they have Agenda 2063, which talks about the kind of Africa we want, or they envision for Africans, or Africans envision for themselves. But I think what is happening, if we're going to look at it more from the digital side of things, is that there are new elements in their environments that they find themselves in. So whereas maybe 3 decades ago they had a larger voice, and there weren't so many other, even if small voices, but other voices that are talking about the same things, then they would be more prominent. But today is the same thing that traditional media is facing. They're not the only voice anymore. And so for a lot of organizations, they're basically having to deal with a digital revolution and trying to figure out how they form themselves in that context. And for some of them, that also means that they're quiet, because they don't know what to do yet until they figure it out. Or they don't want to change, and so they decide to just ignore that it's happening, right? So I'm not really sure which one the AU would fall under, but I think it's part of a more broader transformation that's happening as a result of digital dynamics on the continent, and also the fact that there's a bit more transparency, there's a bit more accountability. So if you say something as an organization or an institution like the AU, people are going to hold you to account, and so you kind of have to decide if you want to play in that space or not. So I mean, I think definitely there's a lot that happens on the continent, and there are certain things that fall within the purview of the AU and other similar organizations, and I do think that it will be a disservice, not just to them but to Africans, for them to just totally ignore that aspect, the digital aspect, and ignore their mandates. I think it's important for them to figure out how to use technology to highlight what their mission and vision and the work they're doing are, because I think for many people that's where the disconnect is. They don't actually know who the AU is, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know why they're doing the things they're doing, and so it's a bit of reputation management that they're going to have to do eventually.
some people have been of the opinion that Agenda 2063 is too far, and if we could do Agenda much closer.
Yeah.
When I look at the African continent, personally, I feel like we have all we need to be where we want to be sooner than 2060. I don't know what your opinion is, but could we say Agenda 2040 and actually be able to achieve it?
So I think there's a lot of a focus on all of these deadlines. And yes, time and structure are important. But I think for many of the initiatives we have, we kind of focus on, it's very easy to define a date. It's harder to do the work.
Right.
And so I think there's a bit of a misalignment in that sense, in that we're so focused on, we want to be the first to do this, we want to be the biggest this, we want to do this by this date.
Right.
But they're not actually looking at what are the actual things that Africans want. What is actually already happening on the continent, right? As opposed to always trying to reinvent the wheel and come up with something new that we can like hype up and say this is the next big thing, right? And I personally, that's part of the reason why after I finished my studies in the United States, I moved back home. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot happening on the continent, and I've also worked in such an institution, a multilateral institution, and I do think there's a level of being removed from the realities when you are in such institutions. Yes, you're working on the issues, you're talking about the issues, you're funding the issues, but you have to go a step further to try to be as close to the issues on the ground as possible, and also to trust that the people on the ground, trust and identify people on the ground who are actually doing the work, and then partner up. So for me, I think that's I'm less inclined to focus on the dates and more inclined to say, what is the work process?
Right.
Who are you working with? What are the developments? What's the plan? And let's really get down to the details of those elements, as opposed to saying, if you say 2063, people say, yes, we have time.
Yeah.
But have we taken into consideration the amount of work to be done within that time frame? Right. So I think that's what I would say on that.
Interesting. Now, tell us, Jemila, Circumspect is growing. Where do you want to see her?
You're assuming she's a her. So Circumspect, I mean, it's a work in progress, right? It's a work in progress, and legacy-wise, I think the biggest thing is just to be of value and of use to Africa and Africans. I know it sounds very general, but yeah, that's really what it is. And for us, if that is by way of creating content that people can use to find jobs, people can use to decide on which schools they're going to go to, decide on their career paths, or use to improve their lives, like all of that for us is part of that legacy, and all of that is part of helping build the African continent. For businesses, helping businesses figure out their space in this digital revolution that I mentioned, helping them have the digital skills needed to be able to not just compete at a local or national level, but compete regionally across Africa, and maybe even with the world and with other parts of the world, because ultimately those are tools that are helping make Africa more visible, helping redefine our narrative, and also helping show people that, you know, we have a lot going for us. Right? We do have a lot going for us, and I think that inspires other Africans. Like just the fact that we no longer have to look west necessarily for inspiration. We can look next door and then see young Africans or African businesses doing amazing things and draw inspiration from that. I feel like that is so important. And obviously looking at the diaspora link as well, seeing how we can stay connected to the diaspora, how we can add value both ways, and how we can leverage what we have by way of resources either on the continent or in the diaspora to work towards a common goal. Yeah, so for me, I think that's really, it's a lot, but yes,
it's possible to achieve that.
Yes, it's possible. That's what we're working towards.
I like when you said we are no longer solely looking to the West. It reminded me of something Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said, Ghana's first president. He was like, we face neither East nor West, we face forward.
Forward, exactly, we face forward.
So I like that forward thinking, mentality. It removes all sorts of boundaries around you, and it pushes your thoughts and your plans towards what you see to be impossible, and then you drive yourself to achieving it.
Definitely.
When we look at social media right now and the power it is given to its users, the voices that have been able to find themselves through the power of social media, and how governments have literally risen to power and been taken out of power through social media. Talk about the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
Let's look at America right now, for instance. Donald Trump, he's like on Twitter all the time. How do you feel we as Ghanaians or as Africans can use the power of social media to get things done on a larger scale, like influence policy, for instance?
I mean, I feel like it's already happening in various areas. The 2012 and 2016 elections, for example, I was working with the Ghana Decides project on both those elections, and before the 2012 elections, I did some research as part of my graduate thesis, and talking to political parties at the time, they were not interested in social media at all. Like, they didn't take it seriously. They didn't see any value to be had in that respect. But then fast forward to 2016, they have accounts on Twitter, and well, you can determine whether it's genuine effort or not. But at the end of the day, they are putting out information that people otherwise would not have had as a result of these platforms, and people are then able to engage with these political actors and so on. What I'm really seeing some impact where I'm really seeing some impact happen is on social issues, right? Particularly with regards to like women's issues. So in Ghana, over the past 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of incidents of rape and defilement, and that has been reported on social media. And social media has been used to galvanize attention on the issues. It's been used to raise money to be able to take care of the victims or survivors of such situations, and so on. And so I think on the business end as well, businesses are being held accountable, right? So recently, one of Accra's biggest hotels served expired food to a group of its guests,
and their children.
And their children, exactly. And it actually resulted in a child getting sick. And the only reason why we found out about that is because someone talked about it online, and using social media, again, Twitter, we were able to draw attention and then at least get the company to meet with these concerned guests. Whereas in the past, they probably would have just gotten away with it. So it might seem like little drops of water, but I think more and more people are becoming aware of how they can utilize social media and digital tools. And that's also where Circumspect has a vested interest. So that's why we do our social media trainings, for example. That's why we train entrepreneurs, we train professionals, we train companies and organizations on using digital skills, and also on figuring out how to bridge networks, how to create real connections, and then how to take feedback, which I think is something that a lot of us in the Ghanaian context are not really good at. We're not really good at taking feedback, right? And so you're seeing that play out online. But a lot of our trainees are learning how to deal with if a customer is not happy with a product. How do you address that, especially when they put that out in the open? How do you go about addressing that and make sure that you're actually taking your customer and your client's concerns into consideration and using that to improve your products and services?
Yeah. Oh my baby, you know money no day, baby, okay. I will no play, I go work hard, I know bad. Take a look at me now. Everything's gonna change soon. Make you be with me now. Am I done and you're gone too soon? Baby, I better find your baby.